Well, we're just published a short briefing on the human rights concerns that we have in respect of the situation in the southeast of Turkey, where the escalation of violence in recent months, particularly under curfew situations, is generating extreme levels of suffering for local residents. We have enormous problems with curfew situations where being imposed, where individuals are being subjected to levels of poorly directed, poorly targeted violence, so exposed to risks to their life. At least half of those who've been killed since August are women, children, old men, calling seriously into question some of the law enforcement or quasi-military tactics that the Turkish authorities are using. We also have grave concerns about the livelihoods of those in curfew situations who are unable to access water, food, crucially medical care, often also electricity. And increasingly what we're seeing in these regions under curfew, at least 3 of which in Cizre, Silopi, the Sur district of Diyarbakir, has been now for over a month, combined with the law enforcement tactics that we're seeing, increasingly begins to resemble collective punishment. So what we're seeing is a real human rights crisis in the southeast of Turkey, and crucially, a human rights crisis that's taking place with very little international condemnation, criticism, and engagement. And it seems clear that Turkey has been, the Turkish government, incredibly successful in leveraging its importance now to Europe on the refugee issue, and perhaps more widely in relation to the Syria conflict, to silence criticism that might otherwise be coming from abroad.
But the West has a strong tie with Turkey. How the UK, for instance, can influence Turkey?
Turkey is a strategic partner for Europe in relation to refugee issues. It's a strategic partner in relation to Syria. But if you have a partnership with people who are consistently violating human rights in respect of an increasingly messy quasi-conflict situation, you are not upholding values that you should be. Countries like the UK, the European Commission, Germany, the US should be engaging Turkey much more frankly on an issue that is likely to get a lot worse before it gets any better.
Has Turkey so far responded to this report?
Well, we met with Turkish authorities shortly before the new year after an earlier round of research that we conducted in the region. The Turkish response will be familiar to people following this situation. We need to restore order in areas that are effectively outside our control, and we need to use serious law enforcement operations to do this. Yes, perhaps there are some abuses that take place in that context, but we are justified in this response. Is it the essence of the line? And this is a line that Amnesty International takes issue with. There are very obviously very serious problems with extended curfews that prohibit people from leaving their houses, accessing essential goods and services. Those must end. There are clearly also very serious problems with some of the law enforcement and military techniques that they're using. Poorly targeted mortar fire, a lot of killings are a result of sniper fire. Clearly, this is not a use of lethal force that's consistent with human rights principles, i.e. only to be used where there is an imminent threat of death or serious injury. What we're seeing is tactics that, as I said earlier, resemble collective punishment rather than a coherent, sophisticated law enforcement operation to reinstall order in areas which would be a legitimate aim, but the methods that are being used are entirely disproportionate, illegitimate, and resulting in a huge swathes of human rights violations.
Another issue is blocking journalists and human rights activists from accessing those areas.
Well, external observers are unable to access those areas. That includes Amnesty International, but that includes Turkish journalists, foreign journalists. That includes lawyers trying to find clients. There are huge problems now with investigating many of these deaths because bodies aren't coming out, autopsies are not taking place with lawyers as they should be. So there's a huge problems around accurate information from those regions. There are also, as we've seen, huge problems with those who are engaging on this issue, who are criticizing the reactions of Turkish authorities, being prosecuted. Chat show hosts, academics, all in the space of the last 10 days. So combined with the silence of an international community. The Turkish authorities are increasingly trying to silence domestic criticism of their actions, and this has to stop.
Would you say Turkey is increasingly becoming an authoritarian or even a dictatorship regime?
I think we've seen, and this predates the breaking down of the peace process over the last year, 2 years. You could trace it back to Gezi, but I think the roots of it are beforehand. An increasingly repressive environment in Turkey. We've seen fresh restrictions on the freedom of assembly, on protests, not just in the southeast, but very significantly there in Kurdish-speaking areas. We've seen it elsewhere in Turkey. We've seen in respect of often very banal criticism of Mr. Erdogan in his presidential capacity, a raft of prosecutions under Article 299, renewed spate of prosecutions under anti-terrorism legislation, media being assaulted left, right, and center. So I think it's definitely fair to say, and it's very alarming to say, that there has been a very serious rights regression in Turkey over the last 2 years.